In the wolflands, a female was worth more than gold, and rarer. The blight had taken them generations ago, swept through the packs and left the she-wolves dying in the snow, until a daughter became a thing to be traded, guarded, sold. So when a family was blessed with one, they hid her or they lost her. Aisling was not the blessed daughter. She was the other one. The one born wrong, born hollow with no scent at all, which the packs called a curse, an omen, a wolf with no soul. And a girl who cannot be smelled, it turns out, can be raised as a boy. So she was. She spent her life as the young warrior called Ash, and no one ever knew. Until the Beast King's envoys came for her sister. They took Nev as tribute, a rare female for a mad king, and Ash did the only thing a lifetime of hiding had taught her to do. She followed. She bargained her way through the gates of Blackmoor Keep as her sister's sworn protector, a warrior who would guard the tribute bride, and no one questioned the scentless boy at all. She only had to get them both out again. But the king inside that fortress was cursed, his mind drowning in 1,000 scents, sliding year by year into madness. And when the scentless warrior stepped into his hall, for the first time in longer than he could remember, the noise went quiet. He told himself the boy was only silence. Only relief, a shield against the roar in his own skull, and nothing more. He would learn how wrong he was. Chapter 1. The Hollow and Her Sister. Aisling had learned to fight before she learned to lie, which was strange because the lie was the more useful skill by far. She stood in the training yard as the winter sun went down, wooden blade in hand, and let the pack's young warriors circle her the way they always did. Testing, sniffing the air, finding nothing. That was the thing about Ash. You could look at him, spar with him, stand close enough to feel the heat of him, and your wolf would still whisper the same uneasy question it always whispered. "Why can't I smell you?" Hollow, one of them muttered, half a curse and half a ward against bad luck, and spat into the frozen dirt. Aisling only smiled and knocked him flat. She was good at this, and she had made herself good at it on purpose, because a hollow who could not fight was a hollow the world simply disposed of. Every bruise she'd taken as a child had been a lesson. They will never love you, so you must make them respect you instead. She had a warrior's shoulders now, a warrior's scars, a warrior's easy contempt for pain. She could outspar boys twice her size. She could drink them under the table and never let a drop soften her tongue. She had built the person called Ash board by board over 20 years, and he was a fine, convincing, dangerous young man, and there were whole days now when Aisling forgot she had ever been anyone else. She had heard the word hollow her whole life. Soulless. Wrong. A wolf with no scent was a wolf you couldn't trust, the old one said, because scent was the truth a wolf couldn't hide. Fear, love, sickness, lies, all of it written on the air for anyone with a nose to read. And Aisling wrote nothing. She moved through the world silent as snowfall, and it frightened people, and their fear had taught her that being frightening was safer than being pitied. It had also, though no one but her father had ever understood it, saved her life. Because a girl in the wolflands was worth more than gold and treated like less. The blight had seen to that. The sickness that swept the packs before Aisling was born and left the she-wolves dead by the hundreds, until a daughter became a thing to be locked away, promised off, sold to the highest alpha before she was old enough to know her own name. But a hollow girl, a girl with no scent to betray her, could be dressed as a boy from the cradle and raised into a warrior, and no wolf alive would ever know the difference. "You will be Ash," her father had told her. The night the fever took him, gripping her hand with the last of his strength. "You will be my son, and you will be safe, and you will keep your sister safe when I cannot." His eyes had been wet. "I know what the world did to you, my girl. I know what they called you. But your emptiness is a wall no one can climb, do you hear me? It is armor. One day you will understand it was the greatest gift I could never give you." He'd coughed and squeezed her hand and made her swear. Keep Nev safe. Swear it. She had sworn. Her sister was the blessed one. Nave, 3 years younger, with hair like dark water and a true scent, sweet and warm and unmistakably dangerously female. Neve, whom their father had hidden away in the back rooms of their home her whole life, whom the pack barely knew existed, because a female that lovely was a target the moment the world learned her name. It was a strange, lopsided love, the one between the two sisters. Aisling had spent her life as Nev's shield, coming home from the yard bruised and grinning to sit at her sister's side while Neve, who had never once been allowed outside the walls, begged for stories of a world she would never be permitted to see. Nev envied Aisling her freedom, the sky, the sparring, the sheer wide openness of a life lived out of doors, and Aisling envied Neve her softness, her sweetness, the simple animal fact of being allowed to be herself behind a locked door, even if the door was a cage. They had each spent their whole lives wanting the one thing the other one had, and they had loved each other fiercely, because in all the world they were the only two people who knew the truth of what the other one was. "You've got dirt on your face," Nev told her that evening, licking her thumb to scrub at Aisling's cheek the way their mother might have, if either of them could remember their mother. "Honestly, my great warrior brother, your great warrior brother put 3 of the Aldrich boys on their backs today, and came home filthy." But Nev was smiling, and then the smile faltered, the way it did more often lately. "Aisling, do you ever think about after, when you're too old to be a warrior, when they start asking why Ash never takes a mate, never sires a litter, never—" She stopped. "It can't last forever, can it?" Aisling caught her sister's hand and held it. "It lasts as long as it has to, that's all, one day at a time. That's the only way anyone survives anything." She believed it too. She had believed it right up until the horns sounded from the ridge. The whole pack went silent at once, that particular animal silence that falls when every wolf in a valley lifts its head at the same instant, and Aisling knew, the way you know a blade is falling before you feel it, that the world had finally found them. She was already moving, already running for the house, already reaching for Nev, when the first rider crested the hill. Black armor. A banner the color of dried blood, marked with a snarling wolf's head. The sigil of Blackmore, the sigil of the Beast King. Aisling stopped dead in the middle of the yard, her breath fogging white in the freezing air, and felt the one thing a hollow could never hide, not even from herself. Fear. They had come for a tribute, and there was only one thing in all these lands that a king would ride 3 days through the deep snow to collect. Chapter 2. The Bargain. The envoy did not ask. King's men never asked. He stood in the center of their small hall in his black armor, flanked by 6 soldiers, and he read from a scroll in a voice like a door closing, and the words were dressed up in the old ceremony, but underneath them was the oldest command in the world. "Give us your daughter." "The Beast King of Blackmore requires a tribute bride," the envoy said. "Your pack has long been spared his notice. That mercy ends tonight. It is known that a female of marriageable years resides beneath this roof." His pale eyes swept the room, cold and incurious. A man performing a task he had performed 100 times. "Produce her." For one wild moment Aisling considered lying. "There's no female here." But a lie was a scent, and every wolf in that room could smell Nave's terror leaking through the walls of the back room where she'd been hidden, sweet and sharp and unmistakable. There was no hiding a she-wolf's fear from a room full of wolves. The envoy's men were already turning toward the sound of it, nostrils flaring, and Aisling watched the hunger cross their faces and understood that this was already over. It had been over the moment the horns sounded. Neve came out on her own. That was the thing that broke Aisling's heart, that her sister, who had every reason to hide, who had spent her whole life hiding, lifted her chin and walked out into that hall of armored strangers rather than be dragged. She was crying, but silently, the way their father had taught her. because in the wolflands tears were a scent and assent was a weakness. She stood in the doorway with her hands folded and her spine straight, and she was so brave that Aisling wanted to howl. "There," the envoy said, satisfied. "The king will be pleased. She's a fine one." He gestured, and his men moved. "She doesn't go alone." The words were out of Aisling's mouth before she'd decided to say them. The envoy turned and looked for the first time at the scentless young warrior standing between him and his prize. His nostrils flared, searching, and Aisling watched the old familiar unease flicker across his face when they found nothing at all. A tribute bride sent alone into a strange court is a tribute bride with no one to guard her back, Aisling said, and her voice came out low and steady, the warrior's voice, Ash's voice, the voice she had spent 20 years building for exactly this kind of moment. Send her alone into the Beast King's hall and she'll be dead or broken inside a month, by his court, by his rivals, by the king himself, they say, and then your king has nothing but a corpse and an insult to answer for. Send her with a sworn protector, and she survives long enough to be worth the ride you made to fetch her. She lifted her chin. I'm the best blade in this pack. Ask anyone. I'll go as her shield. I ask no payment, no title, no coin. Only the right to stand at her side. The envoy studied her, and she could see him weighing it, see the flicker of suspicion, the searching for a scent that wasn't there. A hollow, he said with distaste, as though the word itself dirtied his mouth. A hollow who can't be bought with a bribe he can't be shown the worth of, or turned by a scent he can't be seduced with, or frightened by a threat he's too soulless to care about. Aisling let one corner of her mouth curl into Ash's insolent half-smile. You'll not find a more loyal guard dog in all these lands, and you know it. I've nothing in this world to be loyal to but her. Kill me if you like. It costs you nothing. But a blade like mine, given freely at no price, your king would be a fool to refuse it. It was the truest thing she'd said all night. I've nothing to be loyal to but her. And it was also the great lie her entire life was built upon, and the envoy, thinking he understood exactly what stood before him, thinking he was being clever, nodded slowly. The king may find a use for a soulless blade, he said, or he may kill you for sport the first hour you're in his hall. That is his right, and I'll not answer for it. He rolled the scroll shut with a snap. You have until dawn to make your peace. We ride at first light. They took the road north as the sky went the gray of old iron, Neve veiled and silent on a pale horse, Aisling armored at her side with her hair cut close and her chest bound tight and her heart a cold stone lodged behind her ribs. Behind them, the only home she had ever known shrank into the white distance and was gone, and Aisling did not let herself look back, because Ash would not have looked back, and because she did not think she could bear it. The ride took 3 days. 3 days through a landscape that grew harder and blacker and emptier the further north they went. The green wolflands giving way to frozen moors, the moors to a country of black rock and wind that howled like a living thing. At night, Aisling lay awake with her hand on her blade, listening to her sister's soft, frightened breathing, and made and unmade 100 plans. We survived the first month. We learn the walls, the guards, the gates, the weaknesses. We wait for a chance. And then we run, and we don't stop until these black moors are a memory. It was thin. It was almost nothing. But it was a plan, and a plan was a rope in the dark, and Aisling had crossed her whole life hand over hand along ropes exactly this thin. On the 3rd day, black moorkeep rose out of the frozen waste like a wound in the earth. Black stone, iron gates, towers that clawed at a bruised and lightless sky. It was the grimmest thing Aisling had ever seen, and as they passed beneath its long, cold shadow, she heard a sound that stopped the breath in her chest. Somewhere deep inside that fortress, something was howling. Not a wolf's clean howl. A man's voice wrapped around a wolf's agony, rising and cracking and rising again. A sound of such enormous, bottomless suffering that even the envoy's hardened soldiers flinched and would not meet each other's eyes. The sound of a king going mad. Maeve's veiled head turned toward her, and though Aisling could not see her sister's face, she could feel the question in it. What have we walked into? Aisling reached across the space between their horses and gripped her sister's gloved hand. One day at a time, she said quietly. We survived today. That's all. But even as she said it, listening to that broken voice tear itself apart behind those black walls, Aisling felt the cold certainty settle into her bones that nothing about this place was going to be as simple as survival. Chapter 3. The Mad King. They kept the Beast King in the Great Hall, which Aisling thought was a strange place to keep a monster, until she understood that the hall was the cage. Iron had been worked into every archway, black bars set into the old stone. The high windows were barred, iron rings hung from the walls, and iron chains, though none were fastened now. The whole vast space had been built to hold something, and Aisling did not have to wonder long what. On a black throne at the far end, beneath a canopy of tattered banners gone gray with age, sat the most dangerous creature she had ever seen. Vark of Blackmoor did not look mad at first. He looked carved, broad through the shoulders, still as stone, dark hair falling loose around a face that might have been beautiful before whatever lived inside him had begun to eat him alive. He wore no crown. His hands gripped the arms of the throne as though it were the only thing anchoring him to the earth, and his knuckles were white with the strength of that grip. It was his eyes that told the truth. They were the wrong color for a man, a burning amber, the wolf sitting far too close beneath the surface, and they moved constantly, restlessly, ceaselessly, as though he were tracking 100 things in the room that no one else could see or hear or smell. Aisling realized with a slow chill that he probably was. The tribute, announced an old she-wolf who stood at the king's side. She was gnarled and gray, bent with age, and she kept one knotted hand resting on the king's shoulder the way a handler rests a hand on a beast it is trying to gentle. Aisling would learn her name was Maeve, and that she was the only living soul in all of Blackmoor the king had never once, in 10 years of madness, tried to kill. From the western packs, my lord, a female. Neve, they call her. They pushed Neve forward. She trembled, her veil slipping, and the king's burning amber eyes fixed on her. And Aisling watched his nostrils flare, watched him drink in her sister's sweet, terrified, unmistakably female scent, and watched him flinch. His whole body recoiled, his jaw clenched. A low, terrible sound tore its way out of his chest. Not hunger, Aisling realized, not desire, but pain, as though the scent of one more frightened creature were one more voice added to a scream already far, far too loud to bear. Take it away, Varric said through his teeth, and his voice shook with the effort of speech. Take it away. There are already too many. Every one of you, every scent, all of you screaming at once. The fear and the wanting and the lies. I cannot. His hands spasmed on the arms of the throne, and the wood groaned. Get it out of my hall. Maeve murmured something low and steadying. The guards moved to draw Neve back, and in the shuffle and confusion of it, Aisling did what she had come here to do. She stepped forward, putting her own body between her frightened sister and the mad thing on the throne. The hall went silent, not the frightened silence of before, a different silence, one that seemed to radiate outward from the throne itself. Aisling looked up and found that the Beast King had gone utterly, perfectly still. His burning eyes had stopped their endless, restless tracking. They had fixed on her, on the scentless warrior standing before him, and the terrible tension had begun visibly to drain out of his shoulders. He was staring at her the way a man 3 days lost in a blizzard stares at the first light of a distant window. You, Varric breathed. Aisling's mouth had gone dry as ash. My lord. What are you? He rose from the throne. The guards tensed all along the hall. Maeve's old hand tightened on his shoulder. He came down off the dais, one slow, deliberate step at a time, and his eyes never once left her face. There's nothing. When I look at you, when I reach for you, there's nothing, no fear, no lie, no wanting, no—" His breath caught, and something that was almost a laugh, almost a sob, broke out of him. "Do you have any idea how long it has been since I stood in a room with a single silent thing in it? Do you know what it is to drown for 10 years and then all at once find you can breathe?" He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the unnatural furnace heat pouring off his skin, and Aisling held herself perfectly still by nothing but the iron will of 20 years' practice, meeting those mad amber eyes through the mask of a boy who had never in his life been afraid of anything. "He is a hollow, my lord," Maeve said carefully from the dais. "Scentless, born without. He came as the girl's sworn guard. He's quiet," Varric said, as though the old woman had said nothing at all. His gaze moved over Aisling's face, hungry and wondering and desperate. "You will stay, not in the barracks with the others. Here, near me, where it's—" His jaw worked around the word like it hurt him. "Where it's quiet." "My lord, I'm sworn to guard the female," Aisling said, and even to her own ears it sounded thin. "I can't, then guard her from beside me." And here his voice dropped, low enough that only she could hear it, and for one moment the madness pulled back from his eyes like a tide going out, and something else looked out at her from underneath, something unbearably exhausted, and lonely, and human. "Please," said the Beast King in the voice of a creature that had clearly not asked anyone for anything in a very long time. "Please, stay." And Aisling, who had come to Blackmoor to steal her sister back from a monster, who had a plan thin as a rope and a heart set hard as the black stone around her, looked into the ruined, pleading face of the monster and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Chapter 4. The Silence He Craves. She learned the shape of the curse from Maeve in the long grey hours while the king slept. The old she-wolf had taken one look at the scentless boy the king refused to release and, for reasons Aisling didn't understand at first, decided to be kind. She brought Aisling into her herb-warm rooms off the great hall, sat her by the fire, and while her knotted hands ground dried leaves to powder in a stone mortar, she told the story that no one in Blackmoor spoke aloud. 6 generations back, Maeve said, the first Blackmoor— 6 generations back, Maeve said, the first Blackmoor king betrayed a witch who loved him. She gave him her heart, and her craft, and her whole self, and when he'd taken all he wanted, he cast her out into the winter to freeze. So she cursed his blood, cursed the whole line to come. The pestle turned and turned. But she was clever, that witch, cruel clever. She didn't take his strength or his life or his crown. She took the thing a wolf treasures most in all the world, his scent, his nose, and she turned it against him. Maeve looked up, firelight in the deep lines of her face. "A Blackmoor king smells everything, girl. Every fear in every heart around him, every lie on every tongue, every want, every grief, every death, every sickness, all of it, all the time, and louder every year that he lives, until the noise of the whole world's soul comes pouring in through his nose and drowns the man, and leaves nothing behind but the beast." She set down the mortar. "That's the madness. That's what's eating him. Not weakness, not sin, just too much truth and no way to close the door on it." Aisling sat very still, staring into the fire. "And I make it quiet," she said. "And you make it quiet." Maeve's old eyes were sharp as flint. "I have tended 6 mad kings in my long life, Hollow. 6. I have watched 6 good men drown in the noise, one after another, and I have held the hand of every one of them at the end, and I have never once, not once, seen the roar leave a Blackmoor's face. Not for a breath, not for a heartbeat." She leaned forward. "Until the day you walked into that hall and my king went quiet, and I saw him look out from behind his own eyes for the first time in 10 years. Her voice roughened. "So you'll forgive me, boy, if I don't much care what you are underneath all that silence. You're the first mercy that soul has been shown in a decade, and I mean to keep you close for as long as the gods allow. That's soul, as though the Beast King were something to be pitied and protected, rather than feared. Aisling turned the thought over and over in the days that followed, and found, to her deep and growing unease, that she could not make it fit the monster she had ridden 3 days through the snow to hate. The days bled into weeks. She stood guard at Nave's side by daylight. Her sister kept in comfortable, warm, well-appointed rooms, safe enough for now. The two of them bent close together in the evenings, whispering plans that grew somehow more impossible with each passing week. And by night she stood, or sat, at the king's side, because Varric could not find sleep without the silence of her somewhere near him. It should have been unbearable. In a great many ways it was, but there were the other moments, the ones she did not tell Neve about, the ones she barely let herself remember even in the privacy of her own skull. There was the night the noise took him worse than usual, and he pressed his forehead against the cold iron bars of his own cage and shook, gripping the metal until his hands bled, and Aisling, against every scrap of sense she owned, against every rule of self-preservation 20 years had beaten into her, reached through the bars and laid her scentless hand over his ruined one, and felt the great tremor running through him go still, all at once, like a struck bell silenced by a palm. "How?" he'd rasped, not looking at her, his voice wrecked. "How do you do that? What are you?" "I'm nothing," she'd said softly. "That's the whole trick of it, my lord. I'm nothing at all." "No." His bloody hand had turned beneath hers and gripped it gently, desperately. "You're the only something left in my world." There was the morning he caught her staring at him across the hall and, instead of the anger she'd braced for, said quietly, "You don't flinch. Do you know that? Not once in all these weeks have you flinched from me. Everyone flinches from me. The whole world has flinched from me since I was a boy." He'd looked genuinely puzzled by it, as though she'd handed him a gift in a language he no longer knew how to read. There was the way he watched her spar with his guards in the frozen yard, those burning amber eyes tracking her every movement, like she was the one fixed point in a world that would not stop spinning, and the way, when she'd bested a man twice her size, the corner of the Mad King's mouth had twitched toward something that might, once, have been a smile. He's not what I was told, Aisling thought, more and more often, lying awake at night with her hand on her blade and her sister breathing softly beside her. He is not a monster. He is a man being eaten alive by the whole world's truth, and I am the only door he can close against it. And that, she knew, was the most dangerous thought she had ever allowed herself to think. It was Maeve who gave her the warning that would come, in the end, to matter more than anything else. The old woman caught her wrist one evening as Aisling was checking the fastenings of her armor before stepping into the king's hall for the night. Maeve's grip was surprisingly strong, and her voice, when it came, was low and urgent. "A word of care, Hollow, and mark it well, for I'll not say it twice." Her flinty eyes held Aisling's. "You are safe here for one reason, and one reason only. That silence of yours. It's the only thing standing between you and a court full of wolves who'd tear a soulless thing apart for sport if the king's favor ever wavered." Her fingers tightened. "But hear me now. A hollow's veil is not sealed forever. It holds while the skin holds. And a hollow's true scent, whatever it is you carry underneath, whatever it is you're truly hiding, and I'm old enough not to ask, rides out on nothing in this world except their own blood." She held Aisling's gaze until it was almost painful. "You bleed near that king, girl, and every last thing you've buried comes up out of the ground at once for him and all his court to smell. Do you understand me? Whatever you are under there, do not bleed." Aisling's heart went to ice in her chest. "I understand," she said. And she did. She understood it completely. She would remember those words, later, with a terrible, perfect clarity. She would remember them at the very worst moment of her life. Chapter 5. The man inside the beast. It happened, as these things so often do, in the dark. The noise had been bad that night. Aisling had heard it from the corridor before she reached the hall. The low, broken, wordless sounds of a man fighting a war inside his own skull, and she had not waited to be summoned. She had simply gone in and found Varric on the floor of his own great hall with his back against the cold iron bars and his hands fisted in his own dark hair, rocking, drowning. She sat down beside him. She did not touch him. She had learned that touch, at the worst of it, could be too much. One more sensation in a mind already overrun. She simply sat close and let her silence pool around him like still water rising in a flooded room, and slowly, breath by ragged breath, the beast in him began to quiet. "Tell me something true," he said at last, hoarse when the worst of it had passed. "Anything at all. A true thing to hold on to in the dark." He turned his head, and his amber eyes found hers in the low firelight. Human eyes now, exhausted and clear. "When you speak, there's no scent to your words, no fear underneath them, no wanting, no lie. Do you understand what that means to me? Every soul in this place, when they speak to me, I smell what they truly mean, and it is never, never what their mouths are saying. 10 years of that. 10 years of knowing exactly how much everyone around me lies." His voice cracked. "But you, when you tell me something is true, I can simply believe it. You're the only honest thing left in the whole ruin of my world, and you don't even know what a gift that is." "I am the largest and most complete lie you have ever allowed near you," Aisling thought, and the guilt of it turned in her like a knife between the ribs. "I had a father who loved me," she said instead, because that at least was true, and she found she wanted to give him something true, wanted it with an ache that frightened her. "He taught me everything I know, how to fight, how to stand, how to look the whole world in the eye when the whole world had decided I was worthless." Her throat tightened. "He told me I was worth something on the very days everyone else told me I wasn't. He died 3 winters ago, of a fever, holding my hand. I still reach for him sometimes when it's bad, reach for a hand that isn't there anymore." Varric was quiet a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had gone soft. "I never had that," he said. "My father was already lost to the madness by the time I was born. I never knew him as a man, only as the beast in the iron hall, the thing they eventually had to put down when I was 9. My mother, they tell me, walked out into the moors one winter night, rather than raise another cursed child and watch it drown the way she'd watched him drown." He laughed, low and empty, a sound with no floor beneath it. "So I was raised by handlers in fear. Everyone in this place has been counting the years until I fail hollow. They've been counting since I was a boy, waiting for the day the Beast King finally becomes only the beast, so they can be rid of him." He looked at his own scarred hands. "I've never let myself take a mate. Did you know that? They bring me females. The tribute you guard is only the latest of a long line of them. Beautiful ones, willing ones sometimes, and I send every one of them away." His jaw tightened. "Why would I chain a living soul to a rotting mind? Why would I give my heart to someone, only so she could stand at the bars and watch me lose it, year by year, the way my mother watched my father?" He shook his head slowly. "No, the last Blackmoor king will die the way all of us die, alone, screaming in an iron hall with a handler holding a blade, and that is the one mercy I can still give the world, that when I go, I'll take no one down into the dark with me." Aisling's chest ached so fiercely she could scarcely draw breath. He is not a monster, she thought, with something very close to despair. He is the loneliest creature I have ever known, and he has decided to suffer alone on purpose, to spare everyone else the sight of it, and I am falling into him like a stone into deep water, and I cannot afford to fall. "Maybe you're wrong," she said, very softly. "About the chain. Maybe the right bond wouldn't be a chain at all. She hesitated, then said the thing she had been thinking for weeks. Maybe it would be an anchor, something to hold you steady in the storm instead of drowning beside you. Varric turned to look at her fully then, and something moved behind his eyes. His wolf, rising, reaching, straining toward the scentless warrior at his side with a want that made no sense to either of them and would not be reasoned away. "When you're near," he said slowly, wonderingly, as though the words frightened him, "it isn't only the silence anymore. It hasn't been the silence alone for weeks now." His voice dropped, rough. "There's something else, some pull, I don't have a word for it. When you leave the hall at night, I count the hours until you come back, and I tell myself it's the quiet I'm missing, but it isn't. It's you. And I don't—" He stopped abruptly, jaw clenching, and dragged himself visibly back from the edge of something. "Forgive me. The madness twists things. It takes a want and makes it monstrous. It makes me reach for things I've no right to reach for." He turned his face away. "Ignore me. It's only the sickness talking." But Aisling had heard the thing underneath the words. She had heard it clear as a struck bell, and she lay awake all that long night on her pallet beside her sleeping sister, her heart slamming against the cage of her ribs, staring at the black stone ceiling, because the terrible truth was that she had wanted it too. She had wanted it for weeks. She had wanted it from the moment the Mad King looked out from behind his own eyes and said, "Please stay," in a voice that had forgotten how to ask for anything. She was falling in love with a monster who did not know she was a woman, and a monster who did not know she was a lie. There was no version of this, she told herself fiercely, that did not end in ruin. None. She had always known that. She had known it before she ever passed beneath the black gate. She stayed anyway. God help her, she stayed. Chapter 6. The Warden's Eye. Not everyone in Blackmoor Keep wanted the king to find his peace. Aisling should have understood that sooner. She'd been so consumed by the terrible tangle of her own heart that she'd nearly missed the cold thing gathering in the shadows of the great hall, watching her, weighing her, deciding what she was and what to do about it. His name was Corvin. He was the king's cousin, and the warden of Blackmoor, the man who had ruled the fortress in all but name through the 10 long years of Varric's decline. He was everything the Beast King was not, smooth where Varric was savage, cold where Varric burned, entirely and perfectly sane. He had a smile that never once reached his pale eyes, and he wore it constantly. And he had spent a decade waiting, with a patience Aisling would come to understand was bottomless, for the last Mad King of the cursed line to finally fall, so that the crown might pass at long last to a Blackmoor whose blood had run out clean of the witch's curse. To him. He had built his whole life around that waiting. Aisling would learn it slowly, in whispers from the servants and warnings from Maeve, how Corvin had run the keep, commanded its guards, held its purse and its power for 10 years, always in the king's name, always as the loyal cousin, the faithful warden, the steady hand steering a ship whose captain was drowning. How he had let the Pax believe the king still ruled, while quietly making certain the king ruled nothing at all. How every year Varric slid further into the noise, and every year Corvin's grip grew a little tighter, and how the warden had come, over that long decade, to think of the crown as a thing already his, simply not yet, formally, delivered. And a lucid king, Aisling slowly understood, was the one thing in all the world that Corvin could not allow. She felt his attention settle on her the way you feel a cold draft from a door left open somewhere in a warm house. She had been careful. She was always careful. Carefulness was the whole architecture of her life. But there was no hiding the thing that had happened in that hall. The entire keep was whispering it, the scentless boy who calms the king. The mad wolf, clear-eyed for the first time in 10 years, all because of a hollow guard he refuses to send away, keeps at his side day and night, will not let out of his sight. "You've done something quite remarkable," the warden told her, cornering her in a cold stone gallery one gray afternoon, his voice all silk and warmth and nothing behind it. "The king hasn't been this clear-headed in years. Some of the older servants have begun to hope." He said the word as though it were an illness. His pale eyes searched her face, and Aisling felt his wolf reaching out for a scent that was not there, and saw the small flicker of unease when it found only silence. A hollow, how very convenient. So difficult, isn't it, to know what a man with no scent is truly thinking, to know what he truly wants. "I think about keeping my sister alive," Aisling said flatly. "That's the whole of what I want, that's all. Of course, the devoted brother." Corvin's smile widened by a careful fraction. "And yet the king grows fond of you." "Very fond. Fondness is such a fragile, dangerous thing in a mad creature, don't you find? Here today, and tomorrow?" He spread his hands. "Tomorrow the beast wakes and turns and tears apart the very thing it loved best, the way beasts always do in the end. It would be a great pity if you were standing too close on that particular morning." He leaned in just slightly and dropped his voice to something almost gentle. "Do be careful, little Hollow. Accidents have a way of finding those who stand too near a dying king. I would hate to see you become one." He left her cold to the marrow of her bones. And then, a week later, he made his first move, and Aisling understood that his warning had not been a warning at all, but a promise. It came dressed as a kindness, which was, she would learn, always Corvin's way. A summons the tribute bride, Neve, was to be moved to finer quarters, higher in the keep. A mark of the king's esteem, the warden's man explained smoothly. Better rooms, a better view. Aisling smelled the trap in it instantly. Higher in the keep meant further from her, meant harder to reach, meant her sister isolated and alone behind more doors and more guards, a hostage moved quietly into a better cell. It was elegant. It threatened nothing openly. It simply, gently, took Neve further out of Aisling's reach and reminded her, without a single raised voice, exactly how much power the warden held and how little she did. That night she went to Neve's new rooms. She had to argue past two of Corvin's guards to do it, which was of course the entire point, and found her sister pale and frightened at the window, staring out at the black moors. "He's separating us," Neve whispered, gripping Aisling's hands hard enough to hurt. "That man, the cousin. I saw the way he looked at me when they moved me, like I was a coin he was deciding how to spend. Aisling, we have to go, soon, before he decides you're in his way and does something about it." Her dark eyes searched her sister's face. "You're different, these last weeks. You're always with the king now. Aisling." Her voice dropped, careful, afraid. Tell me you haven't started to care for him. Tell me you remember why we're here." And Aisling opened her mouth to say, "Of course I remember. Of course not. Don't be foolish," and found that she could not make the lie come out. She had lied her entire life. She had lied to whole packs, to armored envoys, to the Mad King himself every single day without a flicker, and she could not, sitting in the cold with her sister's frightened hands in hers, make herself lie about this. "I remember," was all she managed. "I promise you I remember, Neve. The moment there's a chance, the moment a door opens, we run and we don't look back, and I get you free of this place if it's the last thing I ever do. I swore it to Father. I swear it to you." But her sister had known her too long and too well, and Aisling watched the understanding dawn in Neve's eyes, the grief of it, and the fear. "Oh, Aisling," Neve whispered. "What have you done? What have you gone and done to yourself?" Aisling had no answer. She had fallen in love with a monster who did not know she was a woman, in a fortress ruled by a man who wanted her dead, while the one person she'd come to save begged her to remember the plan. There was no version of this that did not end in ruin. She had always known that. The walls, she understood, were beginning to close. Chapter 7. The Blade in the Dark. Corvin did not wait long to make his true move. He had waited 10 years for the crown. Now that a scentless boy threatened to snatch it back out of his hands, he found, it seemed, that his patience had a bottom after all. It came at the turning of the season, on the one night of the year the old rites demanded the king be brought out before his whole gathered court and people, proof, once a year, that a living king still held the black throne of Blackmoor. The whole keep crowded into the great hall, the lords and captains, the servants, the assembled wolves of a dozen subject packs come to make their obeisance. Varric sat rigid and pale on the black throne, gripping its arms, and Aisling stood at his side where she always stood now, her silence the only thing in all that sea of scent and fear and murmured lies, holding the noise at bay, holding the king's mind together in front of so many hungry, watching eyes. She should have known it was too perfect a moment for Corvin to let pass. She'd felt something wrong all evening, a wrongness she couldn't name, a tension in the way certain guards stood, a coldness in the warden's smile when he'd bowed to his cousin at the opening of the rite. She'd swept the hall with her eyes a dozen times and found nothing she could point to, but the hollow in her, the part that had survived 20 years by trusting the prickle at the back of her neck, was screaming. The attack came from 3 directions at once. They came out of the crowd, Corvin's men, blades drawn from beneath ceremonial cloaks, moving toward the throne with the smooth, unhurried certainty of killers who had been paid very well and promised a great deal more. And in the half-second before the first blade rose, Aisling understood the whole shape of the thing, understood it complete and entire. The mad king, finally lost to the beast at the sacred rite, driven to slaughter by his own affliction, cut down by loyal, grieving guards for the safety of all. And the crown passes, at last, clean, to the faithful warden who did everything he could. It was perfect. It was exactly the kind of tragedy no one would ever look at twice. "Varric!" she screamed, his name, not his title. She didn't even think, there was no time to think, and threw herself between the king and the first descending blade. And then there was nothing in the world but chaos and steel. Aisling fought the way her father had taught her, the way she had fought her whole life to survive in a world that had spat on her and called her soulless. She was fast, faster than any of them expected, because none of them had ever taken the scentless boy for anything but the king's strange pet. She was vicious because she had learned viciousness young, and she had learned it well. She put down the first man before he understood he was in a fight at all, and turned the second's own blade back into his gut, and she heard behind her the beast king roar, heard the wet, tearing sounds of a wolf that had stopped pretending to wear the shape of a man, as Varric came off his throne and into the attackers with a savagery that emptied the great hall of everything but screaming. They were winning. She had the space to think it, even in the middle of it. We're winning. He's magnificent and terrible, and we are actually winning. And then the third man, the one she had not seen, the one who had come low and quiet through the panicking crowd while she was turned away, drove his blade up beneath her guard and deep into her side. The pain was white and enormous, a thing beyond pain, a lightning strike that folded her in half. Aisling gasped, staggered, and clapped her hand hard against the wound, and felt the hot, terrible, wet spill of her own blood pouring out between her fingers. And understood, in that single suspended instant, with a horror that swallowed even the agony, exactly what she had just done. She was bleeding. A hollow's veil is sealed with nothing but their own blood. For one long, suspended moment, nothing happened. The fight still raged. Varric was still a whirlwind of teeth and fury at the far end of the dais, and the crowd still screamed, and the blood ran hot over Aisling's clenched fingers and dripped dark onto the ancient stones. And then the Beast King went utterly, absolutely still. His head came up, his burning amber eyes swung across the ruined hall, past the bodies, past the panic, past the blood of a dozen men, and found her. Found the scentless warrior who had never, in all these long months, in all these nights at his side, carried any scent at all. And Aisling watched the truth strike him like a mountain coming down. Because her blood was in the air now, her blood, her true blood, and rising off it, unsealed at last, was every single thing she had spent the whole of her life burying. not a boy, not a soulless hollow, a female, a living, breathing, bleeding, frightened female, and threaded through even that, unmistakable to the wolf that had been reaching for her in the dark for months without ever understanding why. Mate. The scent of his own mate, bleeding out on the stones of his hall. You, Varric breathed, and it was not a question this time. It was the sound of a man's entire world breaking open down the middle. All this time, every night, you've been... And that was the moment the roof of the gallery came down on top of them. Chapter 8, Blood and Truth. She did not lose consciousness. She wanted to, later. It would have been kinder. But she stayed awake through the whole of it and remembered every moment. Corvin's men had brought down the old timbers of the upper gallery deliberately, to bury the chaos in stone and dust and finish the work the blades had begun, to make certain that whatever the truth of this night, no one would ever be able to sift it back out of the rubble. And in the roar and the choking dust and the crash of falling stone, Aisling felt herself seized, lifted, carried, fast and low and terribly sure, out of the collapsing hall and through corridors she did not know, held hard against a chest that burned like an open forge. Varric had her. The Beast King was running, carrying her through his own crumbling fortress, one arm crushed protectively around her and then the other cradling her head against him as though she were the only fragile thing in all the world. He did not stop until they were deep in the old cold heart of the keep, in a small forgotten stone chamber with a single barred window and a door he kicked shut behind them. He laid her down on the floor with a gentleness that was almost unbearable to feel in a creature that size and that strength, and he pressed both his great scarred hands over the wound in her side to hold the blood inside her body, and Aisling saw that his hands were shaking. "Stay awake," he ordered, and his voice shook worse than his hands. "Look at me, Aisling, stay awake." "Varric." Her voice came thin and far away. She had to tell him. She had to tell him all of it now, before she bled out on this cold floor with the lie still whole between them. "There isn't. You have to know. My name was never Ash. It was never Ash." And now the truth came pouring out of her the way the blood came, unstoppable, because she was wounded and afraid, and so utterly, bone-deeply done with the lie. "It's Aisling. I'm a woman. I've been a woman all along. I've been a woman every single day, every night I sat beside you, every true thing I told you. I came here to steal my sister back from you. I've lied to you from the first hour I lied in the yard, and I lied in your hall, and I lied when you told me I was the only honest thing left in your world." "I know." His hands pressed harder against her side, and the blood welled up dark between his fingers. His burning eyes had gone wet. "I know exactly what you are now. I can smell every part of it all at once." "Then you should hate me." She was crying, she realized distantly. There were tears running hot down into her hair. "You should hate me, you have to hate me. I made you trust a lie. I'm the exact thing that killed your father, a false heart let too close. I made you care for something that was never real." "Aisling." He said her true name, her real name, the name no one in this fortress had ever known, and hearing it in his ruined voice broke something loose in her chest that had been locked her whole life. "Aisling, do you know what I smell? Under the blood, under the lie, under the fear and the dust and all of it. Do you know what's underneath?" He bent low over her, and he was trembling, this enormous, cursed, impossible creature, trembling like a leaf in a hard wind. "I smell my mate. I have been smelling her for months and calling myself mad for it. I thought the curse had finally twisted me so far out of shape that I was falling in love with a boy who could never want me. I thought it was the sickness inventing a want to torture me with. I have hated myself for it, night after night, sitting beside you, aching for someone I believed I had no right to ache for." A broken sound tore out of him, half laugh, half sob. "And instead, the one thing in my whole rotten life that felt true turns out to have been true all along. You're real. You're a woman. You're my mate. You've been mine since the first night you walked into my hall and the screaming stopped." "I don't understand," she whispered. The room was going soft and gray at the edges. The peace, the silence you find in me, that's only the hollow. That's only because I've no scent. It isn't, it can't be. No. His hand came up to cradle the side of her face, careful, so careful of the blood. Listen to me. Stay with me and listen. There's a story, an old one. Maeve told it to me when I was a boy, before I stopped letting myself believe in anything at all. His thumb stroked her cheekbone, keeping her eyes on his. A silent mate. The one bond in all the world the curse can't touch, because the curse works through scent, Aisling, through the noise of everyone's soul pouring in, and a hollow has none. A silence the roar can't drown, a truth the noise can't lie over. His voice cracked clean through. They said such a mate could hold a Blackmore king sane, could anchor him, could break, at last, what that witch made 6 generations gone. I thought it was a bedtime story, a kindness told to a frightened cursed child so he could sleep. His forehead came down to rest against hers. And then you walked into my hall, and the screaming stopped, and I've been too much of a coward and a fool to understand what was standing right in front of me. Aisling stared up at him, her blood cooling on the ancient stones, her whole understanding of her own cursed and hollow life turning slowly, completely over. The thing that had made her an outcast, the emptiness the entire world had feared and spat upon, and named soulless. The wall her father had promised her was secretly a gift. It was the one thing in all creation that could save him. Then don't let me waste it, she managed, and she gripped his wrist with what strength she had left. Varric, bond with me, anchor to me. Now, before Corvin's men dig us out of this stone, before the wound takes me, before any of it is over. I have hidden my whole life. I have been a lie since before I could speak. I don't want to die a lie. Her fingers tightened. Let me be yours, truly, really, just once, before the end. Let me be someone real to someone. The Beast King looked down at the woman bleeding in his arms, his mate, his silence, his impossible stolen truth, and for the first time in 10 long years of madness, there was no noise at all behind his eyes. There was only her. Chapter 9. The Anchor. He bound her wound first. He would not, he said, low and fierce, his hands moving with a frantic tenderness over the torn flesh of her side. He would not take his mate for the first time while she bled her life out onto a cold stone floor. So he tore his own shirt into strips and bound the wound tight, and he pressed his palm over it and held it there, and only when the bleeding had slowed to nothing and the gray had crept back out of her face and her breath came steady again, did he let himself gather her close and touch her the way they had both, in secret, in shame, in silence, been aching to be touched for months. There was no cage between them now, no iron bars, no alias, no armor, no lie. There was only the two of them, in the dark of a forgotten room deep in the black heart of the keep, and the mate bond drawing tight and bright between them like a held breath finally let go. His mouth found hers, and it was nothing at all like the terrible iron control he showed the waking world. It was starved and reverent and shaking. His great scarred hands moved over her as though he were learning, at last, a language he had waited his whole cursed life to be allowed to speak. And Aisling, who had spent every single day of that life hidden and bound and disguised, pretending endlessly to be smaller and harder and other than she was, Aisling let herself, for the first time in 20 years, be known. Fully, without hiding a single thing anywhere. She let him see her and want her and reach for her, and she reached back, until there was no part of her left concealed in any shadow at all, and the relief of it, the sheer clean relief of being wholly seen, was almost greater than the pleasure. I have you, Varric breathed against her bare skin, wondering, wrecked, undone. I have you, I have you, I have you. And when the bond finally snapped fully into place, when it locked between them, deep and permanent and utterly, perfectly quiet, Aisling felt something rise in her chest that she had never once felt in 20 years of being called soulless and empty and wrong. Her wolf, the wolf that everyone had always sworn she did not have, the wolf that had never come when she called it, never risen, never so much as stirred, so that she had grown up believing her father when he said her hollowness went all the way down, that she was a wolf in name only, a girl with an empty place where her other self should be. The silent thing that had waited all her life, patient and hidden and still, waiting, she understood now with tears standing in her eyes, for this, for an anchor of its own. It uncurled inside her like a flame catching dry tinder, warm and enormous and unmistakably, gloriously hers. And Varric felt it happen through the bond and pulled back to stare down at her with wonder, cracking his face wide open. "There you are," he whispered. "There you've been. All this time, not empty at all, only waiting." They lay tangled together afterward in the dark, her head on the broad, warm plane of his chest, his heartbeat steady and slow beneath her ear. Steady, slow, sane. She could feel it through the new bond, the vast, roaring, cathedral silence where a decade of ceaseless screaming had lived, gone now, stilled, anchored. She had done that. Her emptiness had done that. The very thing the world had feared and cursed had become the thing that saved a king's mind. "I spent my whole life," she said quietly into the dark, certain I was born wrong, that I was less, that the missing thing in me was a curse. She laughed, unsteady, wet, "And it turns out I was only ever built for you." "Marry me," Varric said into her hair, and his arms tightened around her as though she might dissolve. "Not as a tribute, not as a bargain struck in a hall of frightened men, as my mate, my queen, the wolf who walked into the storm and made it go quiet." His voice roughened. "I told you I would die alone in the dark to keep from dragging anyone down with me. I built my whole life around that one bleak mercy, and you walked in out of the snow and turned out to be the single soul in all the world the dark could not touch. Aisling, marry me. Let me spend whatever's left of my life being the one who anchors you." And the door of the chamber crashed open on its hinges. Corvin stood in the doorway with a bared blade in his hand and a dozen armed men at his back, and his pale eyes swept the scene, the king, the wounded stranger in his arms, the unmistakable new bond blazing between them, and understood all of it at once. And for the first time since Aisling had come to Blackmoor, the warden's cold smile reached all the way up into his eyes. "How touching," he said softly, into the ringing silence. "The mad king and his soulless little lyre, and look, a bond." He said the word like a blasphemy. His gaze flicked to Aisling, wounded and half-dressed and cradled against the king, and the hatred in it was absolute and ancient and total. A silent mate, I wondered. I truly did wonder the moment the noise left his face. I have spent 10 years hollow, waiting for this cursed line to finally burn itself down to ash so that the crown could pass to clean blood, to me, and here you come out of the western snows to pour water on the last of the fire. He raised the blade, and his men fanned out behind him into the room. I have been patient for a decade, but I find my patience does not extend to this. I think not. I think you die here, both of you, tonight, in the dark, and in the morning I tell them the beast finally turned, and grieve very convincingly, and take the throne that has been mine in all but name for 10 long years. Chapter 10. The Silent Wolf. Varric moved to shield her, a snarl already building deep in his chest, his wolf surging up behind his eyes to meet the threat. But Aisling caught his arm. "No," she said, and, wounded as she was, she rose. She rose up from the cold floor of that forgotten chamber, bloodied and half-dressed and no longer hiding a single thing from a single soul in all the world, and for the first time in her entire life she let her wolf rise up with her. It came like a tide coming in. Not the frightened, bound, silent absence she had carried in shame all her days, but a wolf, her wolf, whole and enormous and pale as new snow, a creature the like of which none of them had ever seen or scented, because there was nothing to scent. A wolf that cast no smell at all upon the air, a wolf that moved like falling snow and struck out of silence, that Corvin's men could not track by any sense they had ever learned to trust but the plain weak evidence of their own eyes, a hollow made flesh and fury, a silence with teeth. The warden's cold smile faltered for the first time. "You spent 10 years," Aisling said, and her voice had dropped into something low and terrible that was no longer entirely a woman's voice at all. "Waiting for a good man you could put down like a lame dog and call it mercy. You wanted him alone. You wanted him screaming. You needed him mad, because a mad king is a king you can murder in the dark and be thanked for it. But an anchored king, a king with a bond you can't corrupt and can't smell coming." Her lip curled back from her lengthening teeth. "That's a king you can't touch, Corvin. And I'm the reason. You should have been kinder to the hollow while you had the chance. We are so very, very hard to see coming." And then she was among them. What happened in that room the few survivors would tell for years afterward, and no two of them would ever tell it the same way twice. A pale, silent wolf that struck from nowhere and was gone again before a blade could find the place it had been. A creature with no scent that a room full of wolves could not corner, could not flank, could not anticipate, because every instinct they owned reached out for it and closed on empty air. And beside her, at her flank, a beast king fighting, but not the mindless, drowning beast the whole keep had feared and pitied for a decade, a wolf in full and terrible command of himself. Savage, yes, but sane, clear-eyed, precise, anchored, his whole vast strength his own again to wield for the first time in 10 years exactly as he chose. Corvin's paid men broke. It did not take long. Men will face a monster they can smell, but there is something in the animal heart that cannot bear to be hunted by a silence. And one by one they threw down their blades and ran, and those who did not run to the door did not leave the room at all. And Corvin himself, Corvin, who had ruled Blackmoor from the shadows for 10 patient years, who had waited with such bottomless certainty for a crown that was never, now, going to come to him, Corvin met the silent wolf in the center of that ruined chamber, and raised his blade, and opened his mouth to speak some final, clever, cruel thing. He never landed the blow. He never finished the words. When it was over, the room very still around them, Aisling let the wolf recede and shifted back, naked and shaking and human and gasping, and Varric was there in an instant, his own torn cloak around her shoulders, pulling her hard against the furnace warmth of him, saying her name over and over into her hair like the only prayer he still remembered how to say. It was Maeve who found them there. The old she-wolf appeared in the shattered doorway leaning on a staff, and took in the whole of the scene at a glance, the dead warden, the 2 mates wrapped around one another, the impossible silent wolf scent that was no scent at all still hanging faint and strange in the cold air. And Aisling watched the old woman's weathered face do something she had never once seen it do in all her months at Blackmoor. It crumpled with joy. "The story was true," Maeve whispered. Her voice broke on it. "In all my long, long years, 6 kings buried, 6 good men drowned, and the story was true after all. A silent mate." She looked at Aisling as though she were something holy, something out of the old tales come walking. "You've broken it, girl. The noise, the madness. I can see it in his face plain as morning. 10 years I have watched that boy drown by inches, and it's gone. It's simply gone." The tears ran freely down the deep-cut lines of her cheeks. "You've broken the curse. You've broken what 6 generations could not. Aisling looked up at the man holding her, the beast king, the mad king, the loneliest and most solitary creature she had ever known in all her lonely life, and found him already looking down at her with clear, steady amber eyes and a wonder in them that she suspected would never entirely wear away, not if they lived 100 years. "Not broken," Varric said quietly. His great hand was spread wide and gentle over the bound wound at her side, as though he could hold her whole together by will and palm alone. "Anchored." He pressed his forehead to hers and closed his eyes. "You didn't take the storm out of me, Aisling. Nothing could do that. It's in the blood. You gave it at last, somewhere to rest." Behind them, through the single barred window, the sun was coming up gray and then gold over the black moors, the first light of morning spilling across the stones of a fortress full of iron cages that no one, she understood now, watching it come, would ever have need of again. Epilogue. They were wed in the spring, when the snow at last drew back from the moors and the first startling green came creeping up through the black earth of Blackmoor, and the whole of the wolflands came north to see the thing the old songs had always sworn was only a story. The beast king sane, the soulless hollow, a queen, and the pale silent wolf that ran the ridgelines at dusk beside her dark-furred mate, the wolf that no creature living could scent, and that every wolf in the wide world now spoke of with awe in the place where, not 1 year before, there had only ever been fear. Niamh stood at her sister's side as she wed, free at last of veils and locked doors, and the long hiding of her whole young life. Free for the first time to be a female out in the open air, safe and honored, under the protection of a king who owed her sister his mind and his life and his throne, and who knew exactly what that debt was worth. In her own time, and entirely on her own terms, Niamh would choose a mate of her own choosing, a freedom their father, for all his fierce love, had never once dared to dream of for either of his daughters. Aisling watched her sister lift her face to the open sky at the wedding feast, watched her laugh in the sunlight with no walls around her, and thought that this, perhaps, more than the crown or the bond or the broken curse, was the thing she had truly come north through the snow to win. The healers said what old Maeve had already said, that the bond had done what 6 generations of suffering and iron and grief could never do, that the children of Varric and Aisling would be born clean, no roaring, no noise, no slow drowning, no iron cage waiting patiently in the dark for them to grow into it. The cursed line that had swallowed king after king for 100 bitter years would end its long screaming, at last, with them. It would end not in ash, as Corvin had wished, but in quiet. Some nights, even now, Aisling still woke in the deep dark to find her husband awake beside her. Not drowning, only watching her, simply looking at her sleeping face as though he could not yet quite believe that the vast silence in his own head was real and lasting, and would still be there in the morning. And she would reach for him without a word, and he would gather her in against him, and the quiet would settle down over the two of them together like snow falling on still water. "I spent my whole life," she told him once in one of those dark, quiet hours, "believing I was born wrong, empty, soulless, a hollow thing to be hidden away in a boy's clothes and never spoken of." She traced the hard line of his jaw with one fingertip in the dark, and it turned out I was never empty at all. I was only ever a quiet place, waiting all that time for the one person the quiet was for. Varric caught her hand and turned it, and pressed his lips to the center of her palm, warm and certain and wholly, finally, his own. "You were never empty, Aisling," he said against her skin. "You were the one silent place in all the roaring world, and I was only the man who needed it most." Outside, out on the moonlit moors below the black towers, a pale wolf and a dark one ran together beneath the stars, one of them singing its joy up into the wide night sky, loud enough for the whole of the wolflands to hear, and the other running silent as falling snow at his side. And neither of them, ever again alone. The world had called her hollow, the world had been wrong. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it and you'd like to support the channel and get the next tale early, the link is waiting for you in the description. And tell me in the comments, did you guess before the end that the very curse the world laid on her would turn out to be the one thing that could save him? I read every single one of your messages, and they mean more